two social workers on a mission to change the narrative, Millennial Babies podcast seeks to empower others in making changes to maintain their physical, emotional, and mental health. This podcast is about becoming the best version of ourselves. I hope you feel inspired. Join Bria Spencer and Fadia Jean-Pierre bi-weekly as they initiate conversations about mental health, fitness, and travel. Share this with someone who needs it. Follow us on Instagram at millennial_babes_podcast, and let's continue the conversation. Welcome back to the Millennial Babes podcast. My name is Bria Spencer, and we have with us today Jeff Lindor. He is the founder and CEO of the Gentleman's Factory, a social club, business incubator, and global digital community advancing the lives of men of color. It is a home for entrepreneurs, thought leaders, activists, creatives, students, and corporate professionals alike. Lindor realized that men of color grow in isolation, which inspired him to create a safe space where men do not feel that they are alone in their personal and professional journeys. Welcome, Jeff. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Is there anything else you want the audience to know about you?
Well, I just want them to know that I'm honored to be here today, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
That's awesome. So, Jeff, as I mentioned, I am inspired by the Gentleman's Factory and what you're doing with our men of color and just in general with our men and the message behind the Gentleman's Factory. So I wanted to know, how did it come about? Like, how did you ended up creating the Gentleman's Factory? What is it meaning for men of color?
Yeah, I think men of color grow in isolation, and there aren't necessarily enough spaces that speak to our unique experiences. So, it really birthed upon the need that we needed to come together. And, when you really think of the outlets that we have, there aren't enough. There are fantastic organizations, communities that are formed, but there aren't enough that is doing it on the scale where you put technology, different innovative factors in. That's really ushering us into the new generation, right? So we just saw that as a market opportunity, and that's where we're really blazing it, right? So it's like bringing men together because we just are too isolated.
Okay. And I noticed that with behind that also, you also included the mental health aspect, which is something that is very important. How did you incorporate that into the Gentleman's Factory as it started as exposing them to technology, how to get out in the real world, connecting with other individuals? So how did the mental health aspect came about?
Yeah, so what we always do is we survey and interview our members. We want to know, what are the pain points in their lives? What are you going through? What's going on in your world, in your space? Because the space is really catered exclusively to Black and brown men. So mental health is a huge component that really doesn't get discussed as much because, it's taboo, especially how we grew up, right? So in that, we've hosted a number of mental health workshops from the lens of, should you see a therapist, or, how do you communicate, or how do you start that relationship, to also just, being in a space where you could just talk to other brothers who are going through the same things, right? And not too long ago, we actually had a workshop on food and the correlation that it has with mental health, right? So it's like, what are you eating that's affecting your behavior? So we really do a deep dive and a deep, go to a deep lens on the Black experience.
So why is that so important for men to really look at their mental health? And like you said, I'm happy you mentioned looking at food. It's not just we wake up, we exercise. There are other aspects of our life and what we're doing that we need to also consider, what we eat, how we exercise, the things that we do. So why is that so important? The food part, and also you talk about the isolation problem. Why is that so important?
Well, because it affects us daily, right? And if you don't really talk about it, then how are you going to get to the next level? So I think that, what we do is we create a space where we're constantly getting a better understanding of what men need and providing them with resources and information to point them to the next direction, and
Mm-hmm.
and again, going back to mental health, that's not something that we grew up discussing,
Mm-hmm.
and we want the Gentleman's Factory, our members in the community, to not go from a place of survival, but how do we thrive, right? Because we're tired of surviving. We're here, right? But how do we thrive, and what does that look like? And it all starts with your mental health, because if you think inadequate, then you'll be inadequate. But if you think success, then the likelihood of you being successful is much higher because you believe that you could do it.
Yeah. And so one of the things I heard you say was that like twice is that some men or like they don't talk about it or they don't address it. And so what have you found a way to address, mental health and taking care of yourself and how you eat with men of color in your space?
It's just having a conversation about it,
Mm-hmm.
because if you don't talk about it, then you'll start to think that it doesn't exist. But those things that are, hovering over you affects you daily. So
Mm-hmm.
it's refreshing to have conversations and events and series around it, because you now feel as though you're not alone. And that's the whole purpose of the Gentleman's Factory, is breaking down that isolation factor. Because once you start to realize that with what you are going through, other people may be going through it as well, but they, were able to, um, um, you know, find a pathway out, and they'll help lead you to that direction as well, right? So I think that, like, our starting point is just to, create an environment where you're able to speak. And not everyone is going to go see a therapist, and then that's not necessarily the goal, right? Like, if you do see a therapist, etc., that's great. But the goal is for you to really just be open, and for you to, get to a space where you feel as though you can actually articulate what's going on in your mind, so that you don't just analyze everything.
Right. And also feel comfortable in being vulnerable.
Yep. Yep.
And I feel like in that community too, just men of color have a hard time being vulnerable or having a safe space to express how they feel or the thoughts that they're having, because there is that stigma, like, oh, if I go to therapy, that I'm crazy, like there's something wrong with me, or that there's this like a sense of like embarrassment also, or just even the power of like secrecy if you grow up in that culture, like, well, you don't tell anybody what you're going through as well. So I'm happy to hear that you have created a safe space for men of color to just speak freely without judgment. And it sounds like the isolation problem is really what that is just having that fear of how you might be perceived, society attending therapy, and their own cultural values and what you grew up around as well. And so I've seen that it really does keep men of color caged in, but it sounds like you're providing that space where they can just freely be themselves.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So as you talk about the isolation problem, because I was listening to one of your episodes and I watched a video, and you really focus on the isolation problem, like, and they all need to like come out of, right, not feeling alone. Like, how are you defining the isolation problem, like, and the barriers that it create for men of color?
Mm-hmm. Well, like, I think that the members really identify what the isolation is, right? So what we do, going back to just constantly understanding what Black and brown men need, we ask, right? We like, hey, how do you feel? Like, what's going on? And I remember at the height of COVID, we would have monthly surveys and asking the same question, but the answers change month by month because of how the world was changing at the rate that it was changing in. So in that, we asked, one of the questions was, what keeps you up at night, right? And the questions vary, and also, like, how has COVID impacted you?
Mm-hmm.
So now, in March, like it impacted someone completely different than in, June, right? So, we had members who lost both parents, right? Uh, you know, at like, one day after the other, so it's like, what happens then? Like, who you talk to, where do you go? How do you even process that information, when life has to go on, how, but you never experience life without such a loved one. So where do you even go to even cry or to, for which, we have conversations like that oftentimes, right? And then we point them into the right direction in terms of therapists and professional outlets, because, the Gentleman's Factory, we don't have the infrastructure to provide those services, but we're not built for that, right? So we're built to be, think of us as like the air traffic controller, where,
Okay.
we're pointing members into the direction that they would like to go into, So we're the resource hub where we then now point them into where is it that they can go, right? So now, we have a really great relationship with GTR, Global Trauma Research, with Dr. Florence and Jean,
Yes.
where for the members who need, therapy or those mental health services, that's a source right there, and there's so many others. So I think that, it's really important for us to get a better understanding constantly of what the needs of Black and brown men are, so that we can continue to point them into the right direction.
Yes, I definitely like that. And I like the fact that like you took it a step further by doing the survey to ask and check in with them, because it's really important that we check in. I think that's the one thing that we often forget about, is like checking with our men of color, or checking with anyone. So like, how are you doing? Because COVID, it took us for a loop. It literally took us our track. So I think like asking them to do the survey really helpful. Like, what are some things you noticed that was coming up for you on the survey, and how is that pivoted to helping them, with the resources that they need? Because it's like you said, it's changing every time they do the survey every month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so what we saw was just a whole lot of, questions that anybody would say. I mean, it's like, what is the next direction? Like, where do we go from here? And, the areas I need higher gains of employment, or one of the things that we found was interesting was that, men were saying how, they now want to settle down, right? Because in COVID, you're experiencing all of these emotional roller coasters, and you're at home by yourself, So it's really great to have a thought partner and a companion there that you can really, support each other through these trying times, right? So, so there's just a lot of things that we're still learning about, Black and brown men. And then, like Gentleman's Factory, we always, are keen to always say that we don't have all of the answers, but we are building the organization together. And by building the Gentleman's Factory, we're also building the Black and brown community.
Yes. And with talking about that, with the COVID, how have the members talked about like how they need to be supported during the COVID, especially as they, like you said, they want to settle down, they want to find a companion, someone that can help them. And if they do find a companion, what do they need from this person, like the partner or spouse, whoever, to create that safe space? What do you find like that's coming up for them, or what's important for men of color, for us women of color, to provide them with, so that they can feel that vulnerability, so they can feel emotionally safe to take care of their mental health, to find resources, to help them with whatever it is that they're they're having challenges with and they need support with?
Yeah, so what was interesting is that 2 weeks ago, we had a dialogue on a digital platform where the theme was supporting Black women, right? And that conversation was stemmed upon the relationship that Black men and Black women have with each other. And then we anchored that based upon the Breonna Taylor and the Black Attorney General, the Black Republican Attorney General, right? And we were just seeing how are Black men supporting Black women and vice versa. And it was a really interesting conversation because we had Black women on, and feel like I'm obviously not going to say too much that was on that
Of course.
that dialogue. But one of the things that I found though was that there is further conversation that needs to be had, because one question was, do Black women need our support, right? And another question is, you know, how, so like, you know, by Black men saying that we need to support Black women, are we saying that Black women are lesser than Black men? Like there were just so many things that just came out of that. And it was like, oh wow, like interesting, you know, like I didn't even look at it like that. I mean, you know, like I thought Black men supporting Black women, it's like, oh, we're supporting our sister. There was a Black woman that was like, yo, like we don't need your support. You know what I'm saying? Right? I was like, oh really? Right. So I'm saying, I'm using that like 2 seconds of the conversation to say that there are just so many different vantage points that people see the community. And it's important that everyone gets a chance to speak, because regardless if you agree with their perspective or not, it's important that you understand where people are coming from, right? So, you know, that's also what makes Gentleman's Factory really powerful, is the fact that we always have listening sessions, right? You know, and it's like, you know, I personally may not agree with a lot of the things that are being spoken about, but you know, it's important that we have conversations, because if we only stay in the box in our frame of thinking, then you know we're going to be living in a bubble, and then when someone now addresses us, we're not going to be well equipped to respond, because we see life from our small little lens, right? And then we really want to make sure that we open it up a little bit so that you have a better understanding of the world.
Yeah, and I like that you provided that space and had that platform where you were able to hear both sides from men and women. And a lot of times I hear, from women that, oh, we're the least protected, in America. And it sounds like for you, you've created that space where freely women are able to express themselves, and each woman may have different perspectives as well as men too. But it gives a space for someone to grow, like you said, and not be in such a boxed mindset. And you're also maybe helping these men to show up in their relationship. So when they are ready to settle down, they have these tools to be able to express themselves in a healthy communicative way as well. And it provides that like a push-pull in the relationship where, okay, as a woman, I'm hearing he's able to communicate his needs, his thoughts, and I'm able to provide a safe space for him and support him in that, and then vice versa.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
And I think what it also does to also put it back on us as women to really be more mindful and say, listen, I know women, we can be independent, but we can't just say, okay, the man needs to take care of the mental health, but also make us look at it like, okay, how am I coming? Like, what am I providing for them? What space am I providing for them to be able to work on the mental health? Am I allowing them to be vulnerable? Because if men doesn't feel that emotion, they don't feel emotionally safe around you, they're not going to open up, because they are going to have like that fear of judgment. Like, you're going to think I'm crazy. So it's really important for us as women too, to be like, wow, like, although I'm working on my mental health, I need to also like take care of them. Like, how do I show up for them? Because this space is like so important and it's so needed. So for you, like, how has that, transformed you and your family? Like, is this also a platform where you find yourself like learning things about yourself, or is transforming you to different direction? Like, how has that helped you along the way to also provide those information, like those resources to those men?
Yeah, totally. I mean, really good question. So I am in therapy, like I've been in there for 4 years, and it's been a really interesting journey because, I'm seeing myself evolve, right? And it's important that I'm always, sharpened or going to the mental gym so that I could make sure that, I'm well equipped to, lead such an organization of hundreds of men that are part of it, right? So it can be emotionally draining, but I kind of, but I have to make sure that I'm good, and then also with my family, etc. Right? So it's a constant reminder that I am not immune from anything, and what's powerful, and I guess what's also therapeutic for me, is the fact that, when I'm in these conversations, I'm not even leading it. I'm also listening, and I'm like, hey man, like, this is what I'm going through as well, man. So I don't know, like, what are your thoughts on, remote learning? I have 2 young children, who's literally in remote learning right now. So they should be in front of their computer.
It's okay if they want to show their faces.
Right. Oh my God. Oh man. So it's like I'm constantly learning more about myself, learning about marriage, learning about fatherhood, learning about entrepreneurship, learning how to balance everything. And I don't have all the answers. I am figuring it out. But what I've made, though, was a conscious decision to just not survive, but to thrive. And the way that we thrive is by constantly evolving, right?
Yes.
So it's that growth mindset and not the fixed mindset, right? So it's constantly having that growth mindset of, okay, how can I do this better? Okay, maybe I should have done this that way, right? So it's always learning, because the more you learn, the more you grow. So I'm constantly evolving. Like, I'm not the same person that I was 2 weeks ago, or 3 years ago, or 5 minutes ago, right?
Yes.
It's constant elevation, and that's kind of how I view life.
Yeah. And I like that, thriving instead of surviving. And for some men, that's all they know is how to survive. And so have you seen, men who've attended the factory, they're hesitant, they're like, I'm not really sure about expressing my feelings, or they're not really sure about attending therapy, like their partner has probably expressed to them, like, you need to go to therapy, but they just don't want to do it because of maybe other fears. And so have you seen that around? And then if so, how have they evolved?
No question. So like, mental health is one component of what we do. Because we have like talks on finance, talks on talks on a lot. But going on from a mental health standpoint, it is a journey, right? So we don't ever want to push anything, and then we want to create spaces where you're talking, right? So we have a digital community where every Fridays is Flex Fridays. So we talk about our wins, right? So like today, one of our members, he's going to be on CNBC at 1:00.
Nice.
So, you know what I mean? Not to, so pretty shortly. So like, that's a win. And then we have members who just go homes. And then we have members who, lost 2 pounds, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, so with our celebratory environment, it's not only like the massive things, like I just bought a home, or I just, got $1 million investment. It's also, hey, you know what? Like, my blood pressure went down 10 points. You know what I mean? So it's really creating a celebratory environment where you feel comfortable articulating yourself. And then what I've also realized too is that, particularly for Black men, depending upon how you were raised, because, there are some, Black men who were raised in, upwardly mobile families, etc. Right? But data shows that, for the mass majority of, men, particularly in urban cities, are oftentimes like the first ones to graduate college, or the first ones to get a graduate degree, or become an attorney, and make 6 figures and beyond. So now what happens is that if you were raised in an environment, public housing, but then you succeeded monetarily, or academically, etc., and then you're in the middle class and beyond, it's like, where do you go to talk about your frustrations at that level, right?
Yeah.
What happens is that you've been exposed to more things, and you're happy where you are, but you want more. But if you go to the barbershop that you were raised in, in the hood, and you now are saying, yo, man, you know what? I really hate my job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're like, I'm making $175,000 a year, but I hate it and I want more. Now, someone who isn't at that level, they can say, oh my God, like, why are you showing off? Or, oh man, you are so ungrateful.
Right.
Look at you. Right. For which now it's like, no, I mean, I am grateful, but I want more, or I want to obtain more. So oftentimes, you know, with the gentleman who grew up in humble beginnings, when they reach a certain level and they have levels of frustration at that state, it's hard for them to even articulate it because people won't really understand what they're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with the Gentleman's Factory, we create that environment for wherever it is that you are, right? You know what I'm saying? Whether you are a contributor at CNBC or whether you are, you know, went to Harvard Business School or Kingsborough Community College, right? Or didn't even go to college at all. You know, this is an environment that, you know, you can feel safe in because we want to see you win.
Mm-hmm. Safe and empowering for men.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Exactly. Also, too, I know, like, as we're Haitian, so another component for me is the Haitian community.
Yep.
And it's like, how do we reach them? Because I know we have a lot of our men who don't believe in the mental health. Like, there's a huge stigma around that. And it's like, how do we reach them? Have you come across that? I know, like, in New York, there's a lot of men of color that live there, especially in the Haitian community. Have you noticed there's still a barrier, or are you noticing, like, there's some, like, we're reaching and, like, that it's reaching them and they're open? And what strategies are you using to like help open that door for them?
Yeah, and it's just having conversations, right? So I'm the co-founder of the Haitian American Caucus, which is a organization it's been over 10 years now, where through that lens, particularly in the Haitian community, Samuel Pierre and the leadership team there are doing great work when it comes to the mental health space, right? You know, so they had a grant to do, you know, work in the domestic violence community, and, you know, like a lot of work in the mental health space, you know, in the Haitian community, right? Because you know, cultural competency is really important.
Yes.
And, you have to understand, like, we always have to understand, how do we approach communities when it comes to their mental health, when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to a lot of the, you know, things that are things that they go through, right? You know what I mean? So how do you communicate an effective message where they understand it, where it's not looking down upon them or it's not too aggressive? So it's like, you really got to understand the community so that you can effectively serve them.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. And I think that what you're doing is great work. And I admire how you're reaching those communities and those men of color. And that when I listened to the podcast and I was like, hearing about some of the work that you were doing, I was like, wow, like, I'm from Connecticut, even though I live in New York. Like, I was like, I wish we can have something like that in our state, because I think it's really important for, you know, men of color to be exposed to more things like that. And I really admire what you're doing and, like, reaching those communities and creating the safe space for men to come and say, okay, listen, I'm going through some stuff. Even though I want to learn about finance, even though I learn about, you know, the business and all that stuff, but I'm going through some stuff, and they have a space where they can come and say, like, let's listen, let's talk about it. And the survey that you created during the pandemic to help with that, that's huge. I think that's very important, and it's really important that we touch them, and, like, how do we continue to reach them is so important.
Absolutely.
What are some steps can we take, like, we start taking, especially for the men that we haven't reached? So what are some things that can we do right now to reach them?
Have conversations, ask them questions, right? You know, and create environments where they'll feel comfortable to talk, right? I think that every man is different, and, you know, it's really important to see, like, what is their communication methods, right? You know what I'm saying? And also, what are their core values and what do they like? And when is also the right time to talk? Like, on Sunday, you know, when the football game is on, you know what I'm saying? Like, no, like, there is nothing that's more important than seeing the Giants lose, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's important to really understand, the gentleman that you are trying to reach. But then also, but at the same time, though, like it's also important that they understand what you need as well, right? Because, I definitely don't want to create an environment where everything is serving to the guy. And then there isn't reciprocity that's being reciprocated, right? So it is important that, we create environments where both benefit. And I think that, men really want to help and, be a helper and all that. Just a quick story. So, like I was speaking with a friend of mine, and then she is, dating this guy, and, she just moved into an apartment, and, he wanted to help her like put certain things together, right? And then he was super excited, and, like he was like, yo, you know what? I'm going to help you with this dresser, right? Super excited. And he's putting this dresser together, but, there's like missing screws, and, it's just like not really functioning the way that it needs to be functioned. And now, granted, she knows how to fix it, right? So then now she's texting me, and she's like saying, hey, Jeff, yo, this dude is messing up my dresser. You know what I'm saying? Right? Do I tell him that I don't need him? Right? You know what I'm saying?
Oh my God.
No, right? I said to her, right? I was like, listen, if you tell him that, right? So it all depends on how you tell him.
Right.
But I would advise that you just don't tell him nothing and just fix that joint when he leaves. You know what I'm saying? Because I knew the guy too, and I know that he's really sensitive. But anyway, so I'm using that as an example to just say that, it's really important that you understand your like companion, right? You know what I'm saying? That you know how to articulate to them, because I know for sure that if she told him, you know what, I got it. You know what I'm saying? Then
he would have been so hurt.
Yeah, I have a lot of work to do myself God. Then.
Right, because plus, like, she also makes more money than him, and then he's just trying to. Oh man,
yeah. But I like that is so true though, because even with like my husband, I've had to learn, when to go to him and talk about certain things. Definitely not during football. Definitely when it's not a basketball game on. When he comes home from work, you got to give him his plate of food, let him cool down a little bit, let him unwind. Then, all right, let's talk, and feel it out. And you also have to first start with like the positives too. And I think that's just with any relationship, pinpointing out the positives and then transitioning into, okay, well, let's talk about this. I just want to check in to see how you're doing. And learning what their communication style is as well. Sometimes some men don't respond right away, and that's okay. Like I've had to learn that too. Like, so I just said all this.
I'm learning how to communicate because that's
anything. So, but then it's like you have to. Some people need time to process, and it's okay going back the next day or 2 days later. Like, I'm checking in with you. How are you feeling about this? And then you get a whole thing about like, oh, I didn't know that was your perspective. And that's just learning. I had to learn this too. And I was like, whoa, because I'm the type of person where like, if I have something on my mind, I need to tell you right now. And I need to know right now how you're feeling. So it's a matter of taking a step back too and be like, it's not just you, it's someone, your partner, a boyfriend, someone that you're just dating and relating, and realizing you have to begin to create a safe space so that you do have that push-pull as well.
Absolutely.
So how do we start building each other, like to solve this isolation problem, right? Like any last like few words you can say, like how we can do this as a community, not just like women or men, but just as a community coming together?
Yeah. Well, it's communicating, it's definitely, having conversations, being open, creating environments where, we could not attack each other, but just learn how to better communicate, and also understanding what our love languages are, right? Because everyone is different, so, it's all about how is it that you approach things, and that's where you'll see if you are successful or if you're a failure at it.
I agree. Definitely the importance of love languages and learning that as well. Well, thank you, Jeff, for talking with us and joining with us, today and learning more about the Gentleman's Factory. Before we go, we do have our wild card segment. And we just like to spice things up and get to know our guests more. And it's simply, we just have 10 questions, and then you just choose one. So pick a number from 1 to 10.
7.
Ooh. Who do you admire the most and why?
Let's say my wife, right?
Oh.
Right? You know what I'm saying? No, my wife, because she is someone who values me in all my ups and my downs, and I wouldn't be who I am without her.
I love it. That's so beautiful. And thank you for joining us and taking part in our wild card and letting the audience know how much you admire your wife. I know she's gonna just love you even more after today. So let the audience know where they can find you.
Sure. On Instagram, so it's so my personal Instagram is at Mr. Community, so that's MR Community NYC, and follow the Gentleman's Factory, and that's at Gentlemen's Factory, and men's is with the MENS Factory _ and definitely check out our website, gentlemansfactory.com. And, if you're looking to start or launch a business, we have a really great incubator and boot camp that we have going on. So you can apply to that. Our next cohort is at the beginning of January. So
nice. And this is open to all men. Is there a specific age, like a requirement to join?
No, so it's so essentially what we look for is people who are forward thinking and looking to get to the next level. So if you want to be in an environment that's nurturing your growth both personally and professionally, then apply to become a part of the Gentleman's Factory.
Okay. And have you considered like extending to other states outside of New York?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so we were actually going to do that this year, but obviously the world changed, right? So that's where we launched our digital platform. But so next year, God willing, depending on how the world moves, we'll certainly open up more locations throughout New York City first, and also throughout different cities across the U.S.
That's
great.
From
Connecticut.
Put Connecticut on the list.
Okay.
Definitely.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Again, you can follow us on Instagram at millennial_babes_podcast. And if you would like to be a guest or have any topics, just email us at millennialbabespodcast@gmail.com. And that's our episode for today. See you next time.